I'm
Okay.
not going to get into any political area for today because I just want a broad perspective on Mohandasbhai, as I call him always. I always like to call him that. So,
I appreciate that.
yeah, no, let's start with what you think is at this stage in 2020 when the world is in such ferment, his legacy is.
I think at this time, if we were to talk about the most important of his legacy, it would be the legacy of hope, of never giving up, and of there being a spark of light, even in the when it was pitch dark. He was always a optimist, and he never ever gave up, no matter how trying the circumstances were or how hopeless the situations seem. And I think at this point of time, when there's darkness everywhere, I think his ideology of hope provides that one, what as we say, a ray of hope, Asha ki Kiran.
Hmm. Where do you think, I mean, he was up against some of the most formidable historical forces that one can imagine, not just as adversary, but even at home when he was rising from where he rose from. Where do you think this sense of optimism came from?
I think it came from the realization of his ordinariness very early in his life. He realized that he was very ordinary and that was not going to help him survive. Because if you look at his early life as Monio and the young Mohan, you see a succession of failures. And for a person to rise from that and achieve something, and then for a person to finally think that he has arrived somewhere and that this is what is going to take him to the dreams of his life, being thrown out of the train at Peter Maritzburg station. If he was a pessimist, he would have packed his bag and said, I'm much better in Rajkot, even if I'm going to be a poor man, I'm much better off in Rajkot in my own home and with my own family. But because he was an optimist, he realized that this is a challenge again to me. And he decided that he was going to fight to better the situation.
It's
And that
interesting.
is where the journey began.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned Monio, as you said, and
Yes,
as a young boy, and the fact that he always looked at himself in very ordinary terms.
absolutely.
And it appeared that through his life, right until his death, he had that sense about him not being out of the ordinary, and yet he was moving the world like no one had before. That's a remarkable combination. How do you think this aspect of his life has not been talked about much because he always gets lost in lofty sobriquet and Mahatma and almost like godlike figure? You are family. How do you personally see him from the ordinary aspect of his life?
Well, I have made it my life's ambition to free Bapu from that imprisonment and the straitjacket of the Mahatma. Because I very strongly believe that making him a Mahatma was the excuse that we were giving ourselves never to aspire to become like him. Because we would always convince ourselves that he had divine abilities, that's why he was a Mahatma. And so we have to worship him. And we are mere mortals, we don't have to be like that. And so it's very necessary to discover the Monio, the Mohandas who failed at everything that he attempted at. He ran away from Shamaldas College in Bhavnagar within 6 months, abandoning his studies because he couldn't cope with English studies over there. And yet, he then said that, no, I will go to England and become a barrister, and he did that. So, this is the entire progression from accepting his ordinariness, accepting his frailties, accepting his mistakes, and honestly convincing himself that those were mistakes which should not be repeated in life. And then if you look at his succeeding life, you notice that true to his promise to himself. He never allowed those mistakes to be repeated. He atoned for all of them. And so that is where I very strongly believe that if we truly believe in Gandhi, then we must understand the ordinary human being that he was and see the journey and attempt to take that journey ourselves.
You know, it's interesting you mention the fact that he has a sense of frailty, sense of not being infallible. And we live in times where the world abounds in leaders across the world who think they are anything but that. So how do you
Yes.
square that part with what Gandhi stood for? And no matter what the historical judgment on him is at this point of our lives, he did deliver something which is unrivaled in many ways. People deride him at
Absolutely.
this stage. I'm aware of it. His legacy is
Yes.
being seriously questioned and eroded. All of that is given. And yet you cannot run away from the fact that at the very least, he was the central figure of a huge independence movement.
Well, that's the whole the vastness of his persona and his influence. That even today, more than 7 decades after he is no more on the scene, people are forced to try to negate his legacy, try to negate his achievements. And that is the kind of thing I always say this, that Gandhi is somebody you can't be indifferent to. You hate him or you love him, but you can't be indifferent to, because he somewhere or the other comes and touches you. Somewhere or the other matters to you. And so this is the exact thing that is happening today, because there's so many other leaders who happen, but they were important in their lives and their legacies didn't amount to much. This man, for some reason, has always been, and that's where today in America, and I'm going to say this, there is a movement to try to convince people that Dr. Martin Luther King was not aware of the traits of Gandhi, and that's why he espoused him. But those people who are campaigning for that don't realize that they are maligning Martin Luther King more than they're maligning Gandhi, because they're calling Martin Luther King naive, that he did not understand the person that he claimed inspired. And I don't think by any rule or any measure, Dr. King was a naive person.
Right, right. In your recent work, you constantly travel, you interacted with a lot of young people. Uh, would you be able to lay out for them in practical terms some of the ideas that you think, Gandhi's ideas that you think work, even in current times, in very practical sense, rather than this lofty image that he has the burden of carrying all the time?
No, I think for the youth, he will inspire more if they understand your Mohanbhai and my Monyo. They need to understand, they need to know of his failures, they need to know of his weaknesses and the mistakes he committed, because if they understand that, it will equip them with the attrition that they face in their lives. You look at it in corporate structures, even in education system, how many instances of burnout happen with the youth? It is because they cannot cope with it, and for every failure they believe that it is the end of their lives. But if they know, if they can then be inspired by somebody saying, this man also failed at everything in the initial phases of his life, and yet he is today revered in some parts of the world at least. I think that will be a believable inspiration for the youth, because today the youth doesn't blindly accept anything. They are questioning, they are challenging. And I think this is the aspect of Gandhi that they won't be able to challenge, because they will see themselves in that believable Mohanbhai or Monyo.
Right, right. As you extricate him from the Mahatma mystic, What kind of challenges do you personally face as you go around telling his stories to the world?
Well, some people do consider me to be brash. Some people do consider me to be irreverent about these things because they cannot see him beyond the Mahatma persona. But I'm not bothered about that. I think people like that are past their effectiveness. We need to create, for the new age, we need to create a better, believable image. And I keep working at that. Whether it makes any difference to people, I'm not bothered about. You see, Mayank, you know me. I've never run behind achievements. I've just done what I can, what I believe in, and I continue keep it to do it because I believe that somewhere or the other it makes a difference. I'm not in the game to change the world, not in my lifetime because I know I can't do that.
Right.
But I'm not going to ever give up. I'm going to keep talking about it, and even if I can instill that thought or the idea in one mind, I will think I have achieved my goal, and I think that is the way Gandhi worked also in a sustainable manner. If I was to borrow a term from Japanese verbiage, I would say that my life is a life of kaizen, small steps, small steps to complete a long journey.
Right. I mean, I've seen Mohandasbhai very often as a quintessential journalist almost throughout his life. He wrote extensively, unlike most leaders of his time. Uh, and being a journalist meant that you very faithfully followed wherever the facts led you. Once again, we are going through a rather weird phase of human history where facts have taken a backseat in all areas, be it in India, be it in Europe, be it in,
Oh yes.
especially in America and elsewhere. How do you think Gandhi the journalist or Gandhi the chronicler of facts as they are? I mean, his entire life was about recording facts as they are. How do you think that can help?
Well, I think we need to go back to that ideology. Somewhere or the other, we have to rescue this world from this whole new acceptance of this world being the post-truth world. I think we need to rescue this world from this idea that we are beyond truth now. Truth still matters. It's always going to matter. And so one fine day we will have to return to that. Because you see, the thing is that lies are unsustainable. You cannot bluff people continuously. At one point of time, they get indigestion from all the bluffing and the lies. But Gandhi could never cause that because the truth lived on its own. Today, journalists like you, man, you've had to go out of the system and create your own niche so that you can remain steadfast to your ideals and do what you like.
Right.
I think Gandhi would have gone to that ideology also, and in his time, he started and ran independent publications which he could run on his own terms.
Right.
He could have become an editor for a big publication anywhere in the world with his kind of ability and things. But he realized that as soon as he did that, all the other considerations would come into play. And so in South Africa, he had Indian opinion. And when he went back to India, he had Young India and then Harijan and all those periodicals where he had complete control over everything.
Right.
And nobody, because he didn't even accept advertisements, so not even an advertiser. I know I'll narrate an incident that happened with my grandfather, because my grandfather, his second son, Manilal, was sent back to South Africa to manage the Phoenix Ashram and manage and publish Indian opinion. And through his lifetime, he continued doing that. And from time to time, he wrote to Bapu saying, please allow me to carry some advertisements because it's becoming very difficult to sustain the paper. And Bapu's answer was always, close it down, but no advertisement. Because he said, as soon as you start taking advertisements, the person who advertises in your paper will feel that he can dictate things to you, and then we will lose our independence. And so throughout his life, he sustained Indian opinion and Harijan back in India, which was Navjivan before. So he had so many periodicals and he sustained all of them completely without a commercial consideration, which is what people like you are doing.
Yeah, nice of you to say that. One of the things that, once again, I always remember about him, of course, it's a well-known aspect of Mohandasbhai's life as an extraordinary communicator in a time when communication technology was almost non-existent the way we understand it now. How do you look at Gandhi, say, on Twitter, for instance? Do you think he would take to something like Twitter as a tool to reach out?
Well, he would definitely have used Twitter as a tool to send out his opinion, but he would have completely ignored the responses that came to him, because he would have thought that they're wasting his time. He wouldn't have bothered about how many people follow him or whether he has a following or not. If he took to that medium, but I think more than Twitter, he would have taken to the podcast uh, medium, the ability to cast without any other considerations. All, that would have been something that he would have admired much more, because then he would have gotten an opportunity to be undisturbed on that. And so I think he would have. There was a advertisement sometime back in Europe, some years back, which won a big award. It was an advertisement for Italian communications. And the video starts with a disembodied voice. And the camera then goes from one monument of the world to the other, which are identifiable with the place. And the voice becomes more and more discernible, audible, and understandable. And you realize that somebody is delivering a kind of a sermon, and it goes through the American continent, it goes through Europe, and it keeps going till finally you see a hut. And that the last bit of it, as the voice becomes completely audible, the camera enters the hut and you see a figure of Gandhi sitting over there. And the punchline of the ad was that if he was equipped with the power of our communications, the world would have been different.
Yeah.
To me, it was one of the most beautifully and very something that had understood Gandhi to his core, and was expressing it. It won several awards for itself.
Right.
And there was a time that I used to keep being sent those clips saying, do you know about this? Do you know about this? And yes, and I think if you still look and search on Google, you'll find that clip.
Okay. I will check it out. And before I let you go, I cannot but refer to his, again, seminal speech, I think 1916 in Benares, soon after
Yes.
his return from South Africa. And he already had a reputation by that time in that circle. But he's surprised. In fact, there was consternation that he spoke about cleanliness in temples of Benares or lack thereof, and
Yes.
pointed out even things like you are not sure if you're walking the streets of Bombay. It was Bombay then. Somebody
Yeah.
might not spit on your head. Now, here is a man who's so focused on things like personal hygiene, sanitation, cleanliness. We are going through a huge pandemic, one of whose core problems has been the way we conduct our personal hygiene. How do you think something like this would have been seen by Mohandasbhai?
Well, I think we don't need Mohandas to tell us what went wrong. I think we all know that the spread of the virus, this pandemic, was because of our own negligence, the kind of selfish lifestyles that we have become used to leading. And it, as you said, disregard for hygiene. But I think this pandemic became a pandemic because of our enslavement to consumerism. You see, it's not as if we've not had epidemic breakouts before. If I have to give an example of just the near past, Ebola outbreak happened in parts of Africa. And it was a life-threatening bug that was discovered and was rapidly spreading through that belt. But the world came together and ensured that that bug or that virus wasn't able to go out of Africa.
Right.
If we could have done that, what stopped us in Wuhan? Because it wasn't as if it traveled the whole world overnight. The symptoms were there, the signs were there. We saw that it was happening in Wuhan. But we were so much addicted to China trade. We were so much addicted to the cheap consumer goods that China produced that we did not want to disturb that, that whole system. And so we convinced ourselves that no, that will be contained. It's not going to come to us. We're too far away and things. And when it went to Italy, we said, okay, Italy doesn't bother. So they are afflicted, but it'll stay there only.
Right.
We were doing that wishful thinking. And that is where, when the Spanish flu happened, it took 3 years to become a pandemic, global pandemic. But Corona took just 3 months to become a global pandemic. And it's because we are responsible. Our habits are responsible. Our greed is responsible for it. And I think Mohanbhai would have told us this. Okay? Now at least beware. Because remember one thing, if this virus, as some people believe, is man-made, then there is going to be some people who are going to make a more virulent mutant of this virus.
Right.
And we are going to be in danger more and more. So we need to learn from this. I'm not saying that we should boycott China, but I'm saying that we should lessen our dependence on the consumer things that we are so addicted to consume.